what's going on? This is Nubia.
Let's try again, please.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is Nubia.
And I'm Francis.
Welcome back to Chronicles Abroad. I hope you all had a chance to look at our first season episode in like months. Francis and I spilled the tea on what's been going on with Chronicles Abroad and ourselves, and how the lifeline of Chronicles Abroad was actually hanging at it by a thread, right? And the steps that we took to work through those things, or as we're working through those things, I'll say, because it's not something that has just happened overnight and it's done. We're consistently working through these things. So with that said, we decided to flip the script a little bit, come back after several months, and really share some insights into what we've been doing individually, and really just kind of dive deep into that, right? So today we're going to make it so I am the host and Francis is the guest.
Oh, snap.
I get to ask the question.
I get to talk more than she does.
Y'all don't understand what I
Hey, listen.
girl, man.
It is what it is.
All right, so for those that don't know who Francis is, and I'm sure you do, but I'm just gonna make believe that you don't. But if you don't, I'm gonna let Francis sum up who she is in a few words, just to kind of give you a background to get you to today. So Francis, kick it off.
I feel like I just opened up a dating app. I have to describe. Anyway, describe who you are.
Let's see if she has a good dating profile, guys. Go ahead.
Anywho.
My name is Francis.
Anywho, I'm 5'4". Okay, so yeah, you know who I am. I'm realizing the more I get to know myself, and the more I read into myself, that I have to stay aligned with my values and everything else. And I say this because one of the things that's a key characteristic of me is that I love adventure and I like trying new things and I like the freedom to move. So in the past, I would choose opportunities and situations where that was total opposite. So I spent a number of years being out of alignment, which eventually led to like depression, anxiety, and all this other stuff. And in 2016, buying a one-way ticket to Thailand, not knowing anything about Thailand. I mean, you could go back to season one, episode 1, part 2, where I go really in depth in my story. But essentially, I was out of alignment. I needed some healing. I needed space, and going overseas provided that for me, that solitude to explore and to think more deeply about and be more introspective. So, but after those 3 years was up, I lived in both Thailand and Japan. And this is when Chronicles Abroad was birthed and everything else while I was living in Japan. And then I came back in 2019, and then I was only supposed to be in the States for a year. And I came back specifically for my son. He was going through some things, but then COVID happened after that, and that extended my stay even longer. So, yeah, and I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what my experience has been back since living back in the States and what the future holds.
Yeah. So you missed out some important pieces that I felt like needed to be addressed, right? So when you left, there was a number of or series of things going on within your personal life. Your dad passed away all of a sudden, and that made you look at your mortality differently. And you were also not necessarily losing your son, but becoming an empty nester, which meant that, you know, the one person that you took care of every day, nurtured every day, was off, and you was letting him go live his life. So it was like you were, you know, now at this place like, okay, it's time for me to do me. Right. And I think those are important things, because even though, you know, not even though we've discussed the, you know, 3 things that we feel like can help or hinder a person's growth, and that is family, fear, and finance. So you were having the family situation going on, you know what I mean? So how did you tackle that at that moment or in those moments?
Yeah, I mean, the whole family thing, there's so many layers to it. As someone who was always the mediator, the one to put out the fires, everybody turned to me to kind of fix things or be very responsible for things. So there's a codependency there, especially being from the islands. If you're from the islands, or you know, that whole like obligation towards your family. So that whole thing weighed on me. But also realizing that I needed to really do something for myself, because you're only as strong as your whole mind, body, and soul is. So if you're in a situation where things around you are depleting you or sucking your energy, then in order for you to be able to survive that and strengthen yourself at the same time is to pull away. Sorry. Usually that's usually not even me. Usually that's Nubia, but
Here she
she
goes.
got me good today. Yeah. So at some point, to me, I always say self-care is self-preservation. So if there's things in your life that are, you feel like this is like a matter of survival that I do this thing. That is how I felt. It was a matter of survival,
Yeah.
emotional and spiritual balance, and I had to go.
Yeah. So one thing also with that you don't discuss a lot of is your personal life in the sense of relationships. So at the time in 2016, you were actually in a relationship or coming out of one. What was that situation like? I know you mentioned it a few times in the last episodes, and the reason why people will know why I am asking this
Yeah, I was like,
question
yo, she getting
as
all up
I
in my
get
business, you know what I'm
because
saying?
we're getting
On my
into it.
business. I
Everybody
didn't
who
sign
knows
a
me know
release,
I don't
child.
play.
I didn't sign a release. Go ahead.
Well, no, because I really want people to understand that there were levels to everything that was going on emotionally, physically, mentally with you, right? So this is why I really just want to kind of dive into the layers. So dad passed away. How did that, if like affect you? You know what I'm saying, in that moment? Because this wasn't like he was sick for a long period of time or anything. This happened kind of like out of the blue, right? Suddenly.
I was talking to him one week, and then the following week I got a phone call. It was really that quickly. And that was, I think the whole year was a blur for me, absolute blur. And I'm very thankful that I had like my sister who kind of like stepped up a little bit. She's younger. I'm very thankful that I had my family to step up. But it was an absolute blur, and I realized I needed space to grieve. And I don't think I could articulate it then, but I had to deal with my grief, and not grief with everything. The person I thought I was, to, uh, readjusting relationships with family, restructuring relationships with friends, being a mom, all that stuff, all those things and roles we have to grieve so that we can move towards the next step. Again, I couldn't articulate it then, but that's exactly what I needed. And living overseas provided a space and the freedom without any guilt, shame related to kind of pulling away from those circumstances, but the freedom to deal with my grief at my grief at my own pace. So so it was a tough year. And then on top of when you're talking about the relationship, it was a toxic relationship that I probably, in my gut, you always have those red flags, and they tell you, your intuition, you really have to listen to it, because my intuition said, this person should not come on the trip with me. But here I go again, my old role was like kind of fix things and take care of people and all this other stuff. So I had to let that role go too as well, because that wasn't serving me. But that person was going through some things. So I was like, come on this trip with me. Trying to bring her along my journey during her mess was not conducive. So that fell apart pretty rapidly. And
As it usually does, but for whatever reason, most times we still try to hold on. But, even prior to the trip, right? Because I really want to just talk about how the trip got there, right? So when your dad passed away and you were going through a lot mentally, emotionally, and really kind of just reevaluating, everything around you and trying to assess, that's also, I would believe, is what you have mentioned was a time when you were like, you were starting to really think about your mortality. And I don't think a lot of us think hard about mortality until something or someone very close to us ends up passing all of a sudden, because then it kind of like sparks in your head like, damn, life is truly short. And I think this pandemic now has, put a lot of us in the forefront of that, to see how things can change in the in a blink of an eye. But at that time that your dad passed, as you said, you spoke to him one week and then the next week he was gone. You had to kind of face your own mortality with that. Like, because you said your dad wanted to do so many things, but didn't get an opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And death was always something that was weird for me. And it wasn't the first time I experienced death. My mom passed away when I was 16. And then my grandmother was really close to passed away. And then my father passed away. So death wasn't anything new, but it was different each time. And one of the things that I really wanted to get a handle of was the impermanency of life. And I don't feel like the West provides that atmosphere to deal with the things that are inevitable in a way that brings you peace and harmony. And so I think that's kind of what led me to Thailand. And I got more into Buddhism. And I got, not that I'm a Buddhist, but I like some of the teachings and philosophies. And those are the things that kind of helped me deal with a lot of my grief. And why did I forget your question, child?
It wasn't necessarily a question. It was more or less just setting the stage and the tone for really the things that we're facing, because I think that people don't realize.
Here we go. That's what I was going to say. So essentially, it's like we live a life that makes it seem that we are going to live forever. And that is not the case. So knowing that, it's like, what are you going to do differently? And how, one of the questions that Steve Jobs always asked himself is like, if today was my last day, how would I live it? It's a difference of like, when you get that, awful diagnosis from the doctor, and then boom, you just take off and you just start living for some people, right? So you have the option here. So there was so much going on in 2016. I had the option of really folding back into my comfort zone and, being surrounded by my family, like moving back home, being in the collective grief of my family. I had the option of doing that. I had the option of maybe staying with my son in Florida. So I had all these things. It's like, when you look at it, it's like, maybe this wasn't a good time to make that decision. Maybe I should just go back home and help my family grieve and all this other. So there was a lot weighing on that decision. But again, I realized that I needed to separate myself from all that, because I couldn't hear like myself.
The noise. We call it the noise all the time.
Yeah. So, and then I realized, yes, life is short, and all those things that I said I was going to do, and all these things that I wanted to create that was not happening. And it's like, why isn't it happening? Like, why can't? And then I started to lean more towards like, I am the creator of my life. So I had to really change my perspective, lifestyle, all that philosophy, to really feed the fact that like today is not promised.
Yeah. And also with that, you talk a little bit about, I know when you and I had started to, communicate and everything else, you were unfulfilled in your professional life as well. I've always teased Frances with, girl, what do you do? Because if she showed you her resume, she has like a slew of different things she's had her hands in. And, I would say now is the first time that I've really seen you in alignment for the things that you do and you really are passionate about, and actually committing to getting those things done without being the octopus that you've always been, and just kind of, having your hand in all these different pots. So here you were really trying to face the fact that, life is short, right? What are the things that I want to do? Why am I not doing them? Or, should I really just be here for my family? Or how am I going to handle all these things? Plus you have work, right? Where you're just like, I don't really know if I like this job, but this is really not going to be what I want to do forever. Like, give us a little bit, because I think that our audience resonates with all of these things. And I feel when I'm now listening and talking to you about your story, you've been through multiple layers of what almost every, all of our listeners have been through. You and I both are moms and single moms of young adults, but we can talk about that a little bit further in the story. But let's talk now about professional life and how you kind of left that to even make the decision to go abroad without a physical job.
Yeah, there's so many layers to that, because it was 2013, I got burnt out by social work. And that was a very difficult decision for me, because I knew what I was leaving behind. And I worked my entire career working with like foster care children and residential kids who were never going home. So leaving them, I felt very, very guilty. But again, it was a matter of self-preservation. And that's when he started seeing me do a bunch of stuff, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted freedom, and I also knew that I didn't want to hear any more horrific stories. And so I needed to come something completely opposite, which led me to different things. But the underlying theme has always been like, I've always been in a people service kind of business, where I get to talk to people or coach them through different things. So just that theme kind of stayed the same for so many years. And then, but again, I felt out of alignment. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to just go and get the certification and go teach abroad. It's something, I'm not a teacher, okay? I may have facilitated a workshop or two, but I'm not a teacher. But I knew I wanted to still kind of do something meaningful while I traveled. That still mattered to me. And so the teacher thing happened. And I also wanted the flexibility to just travel. I also didn't want to worry myself in regards to finding a job or anything like that. So I kind of still wanted that stability. And that led me to being part of a program that took care of all that stuff. But then
did you Google that, or did you talk to somebody?
It was all Google, man. I was a Google queen, just like looking, cross-referencing programs, doing my research. And then I landed on one, and at first I was going to go to Mexico, but that was just too much of a safe place for me. So I totally went the total opposite. But they took care of everything the first time around. But then the second time around, I decided to just do it myself. And so I just found those jobs and went through the process. But again, here I was not doing something that was more of an alignment of things I wanted to do, but at the time I didn't really know it. So I always say, when you are confused or you don't feel like you know what you want to do, just follow your curiosity. So that's one thing that's always been a thing for me. It's like I get curious about things, hence the octopus. I get curious about things and I try things out. And if it doesn't work, I pivot and I try something else. So I'm not afraid to do that. I'm never afraid to pivot or change things if they're not working, especially when you spend a number of years doing the same thing and holding on to something that isn't working, in regards to like being I was a social worker for almost 7 years doing this stuff, knowing that every day, sometimes I hated walking into that office. Do you know what I mean? Or seeing certain clients or whatever, but we do it anyway. So it's like, after that pivot, trying those jobs out, I was like, I could really do whatever the hell I want to do. And if it changes, it changes. Because you never know where that one decision is going to take you to something else that takes you to something else. I don't believe in life there are coincidences. I feel like every path is a path to kind of guide you towards the next thing. So that helped with my anxiety, because then I didn't have to, I could just rely on that faith, knowing that
you are open.
Exactly. But if you haven't had that experience because you're set in that old mind state, then you're not going to feel confident to make those decisions. But part of this whole process is letting go and surrendering. But the minute that you do that, the universe just puts everything in its power, in its place, to lead you back to where you need to be, or to lead you to people that you need to be with, and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's almost like that little mind map that's like, do you whatever, and it's a yes or no, and then whatever you answer just takes you on the next path. It's not a right or wrong, it's just you choosing the door that you choose to walk through. Exactly. So that's good that you had made that, comparison, because so many people live in that fear, right? Of, well, I can't leave this job because it pays for my rent. I have a kid, I have, families to provide for, I have all of these things. But again, you use the term burnt out. And I think that's important for people to understand, is that if you're at a point in your career or in your work life where you feel like physically burnt out, that's not okay.
No.
You have to take care of your physical health.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, moving overseas, my income dropped
significantly. But so did your expenses, let's be clear.
Exactly. So did your expenses. Yeah, and that's the comparison I want to make. If you fear that, understand that we do not need much to live a joyful life, if that's what you're in search of. We can still be comfortable. And this is something that I did not understand living in the States and drinking that Kool-Aid. You can literally live here or wherever you are, just do the research. Obviously, countries have certain different cost of living. That doesn't change, but you realize how much you don't need.
Yeah, I use the baseline of $1,000 a month is a good base for many countries. Like,
Yeah.
if you set yourself at $1,000 a month, that's $12,000 a year. A lot of us have that saved up in your retirement account or in your, maybe work towards putting that into your account to save, like for a 1 year sabbatical. But if you move to a place like Asia, that is
It's
living like a
half,
king or
like,
queen. That's,
yeah.
you can live on half of that. So you just extended the amount of time that you're able to live off that money by another year or another 6 months if you want to use some of that to travel. So that's kind of putting things into perspective. Again, I use that as a baseline. If you move to Spain, if you move to the UK, I'm sorry, but that's probably not going to be enough
Right.
to
Right.
live comfortably, depending on where you are.
But
Um,
but it's almost like still
but
there's so many different benefits. So it's like, okay, I may pay a little bit more if I move to a place in Europe, but the lifestyle of living is so vastly different than the States that it's inevitable that you're going to be impacted by it.
yeah,
You know what I
yeah.
mean? So yeah, that's what it all comes down to.
Now, I'm glad we talked about it not being, healthy for your physical. So now let's talk a little bit about that really quickly. For people who are just now getting to know you, you also came from losing a lot of weight and really being disciplined with how you manage your relationship with food. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that was my coping mechanism for my depression and anxiety was food. So I pretty much ate myself close to 232 pounds. And I was like, damn, y'all, why do y'all tell me I was fat? I was like, no one told me. I'm just kidding. But yeah, I look around, like no one ever said that. Like no one, they're like, oh, you're just my friend. No one, but no one ever said like, hey, I see this going on with you. And so for me, I was addicted to food in that sense, right? But it came to a point where I was like, oh my God, I can't live like this anymore. And that was when I was around 30 years old. And so I just made a commitment. I'm one of those people, like if I commit to doing something really, I don't need a transition. I'm just like, I just go in. So I literally like say, okay, man, I just threw everything out of even if I just bought it, I threw everything out of my cabinet. And then I went on this journey, which lasted about a year, and I lost like 85 pounds. But then, it yo-yos because what I realized is like, unless you get to the root of stuff, then you don't really heal those things. And those lessons keep coming back. So there was more I needed to learn in that process because I gained like 20, 30 pounds back and all this other stuff. So I realized once I got a bit of hand on that, I was able to sustain my weight for as much as I did. But living overseas made it even that much easier.
Yeah, the food is
So
very, especially considering that you chose places that actually have good food. Like you lived in Asia of all places, and the abundance of fruits and, superfoods and just, street food is abundant. However, they don't use the same preservatives that we use in the States. So even though you can eat a lot more of it, it's not necessarily, adding a lot of weight to you
no,
as
no.
well.
And I didn't have a car, so I got to walk everywhere. And I love that. I really got back into walking. So you just adopt that leisurely lifestyle, and then everything within your core changes, your mental, your
Hmm.
spiritual, your physical, all that stuff, just automatically through the process. So I'm very thankful for just moving abroad and buying that ticket, child.
All right. So, lastly, let's jump into. So, we talked a little bit about toxic relationships, right? Passing of your dad, your mental health and your health overall, physically, losing weight and really being committed to your personal health, right? Your wellness. Now let's talk about being a single mom and making that decision to drop your son off at school and saying, okay, love you, bye. Mom's going to Asia. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that, because I remember seeing you on social media and you went travel to Florida. I believe he went to school in Florida.
Yeah, he
And
went
from there
to,
is when you left.
yeah, I left from Florida. And it was really one of the hardest things I had to do because I feel like I blinked and he was 18. I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I taught him everything that I needed to teach him. I don't know if I said everything that I needed to say. I literally remember sitting in the backyard and I was like, here's this list, do this, and check this, and this is my mantra. I literally did that, and I made a Google Doc and everything. I shared it with them, and we read it together, and all this stuff. So I was freaking out, like, what was I doing for the last 18? Did I parent this child? Did I, you know what I mean? So I'm questioning myself as a mom. All these things was running through my head. But I was like, and then I thought, okay, am I doing it wrong? Because, this whole societal thing about moms, am I leaving too quickly? Should I leave this far? I'm like, should I stay a little longer? All this other stuff. And then I'm leaving him in this new state, right? Without family. So my family's talking crap about that. Oh, Frances sent her son all the way down to Florida. Who down there? No family. So I had to hear all this smack, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it weighed on me for a while. And Florida did not work out. So there was a little bit of guilt about that too. Made things probably a little bit worse. And so I don't know if that was the best decision, but it was a decision. And yeah, so it was hard, but it was something I had to do again because both he needs to be his own person and I need to be my own person aside from just being a mom, right?
Exactly. That was right there. That's a great point because you hear everybody go, as soon as the kids get out of the house, as soon as I get the last one out, is never a right time because there's always something. And like you said, you have this guilt of, was that the best decision? We can't live in the what ifs, right? And I love the fact that you said that it was a decision. It doesn't matter. We deal with consequences as they come about because they're the consequences of our decisions, right? I don't think, well, let's just say it like this. Whatever was supposed to happen, happened, whether you're going to be there or not, right? Our presence in a certain place doesn't necessarily stop stuff from happening. It might prolong it a little bit. It may, it may make it even worse. We don't know. But the moment that we start making ourselves a priority, we start having all this guilt. And I don't understand where that comes from.
Well, I mean, we live in a society. I was reading this really fascinating article about human nature, and it was just basically saying how we have all these false narratives and that we create these narratives about ourselves, which then create the systems, and then we have to fit into those systems. It's just fascinating. So that's where that comes from. It comes from the society who says this is what the system is supposed to be like. We try to mold ourselves to fit that by following the norms and everything else. And so when you don't have another point of reference of what that looks like, then yeah, you're gonna feel those automatic feelings of guilt and everything else. But again, you as a parent need to be your best for your children. One of my favorite quotes was, the most painful thing that a child can see, I'm not doing it word for word, but the most painful thing that a child can see is the life of an unlived parent. And I was like, damn.
Ooh, girl, that made me hit. What?
But do you know what that feels like to a child who's watching their parent not live to their fullest potential?
Yeah.
To live a life well lived? Because all that's going to do is trickle down to your children, who then will be inspired.
Damn, that hit. Ouch. Yes, man. Great words of wisdom.
Yeah.
So, thank you for being in full transparency about like all that was going on, right? Because that's a pot full of stuff.
That's a lot of stuff, yeah.
Over a course of, and that's the thing is that we all have a pot full of stuff.
It's not going to go away.
It's not going to go away, right?
It just changes, right?
It does. However, we manage it a lot differently when we start making different choices.
Exactly.
So now let's move on to that one-way ticket. You land in Thailand. What now is going on with that pot?
Yeah, so I land in Thailand. It feels weird. Everything's weird. Everything smells differently, looks differently, moves differently, sounds differently. So it was overwhelming for me, especially.
And this was your first time.
My first time. Yeah, I was not an avid traveler besides being born in the States. I traveled within the States, whatever, but never traveling overseas and never traveling that far because it was far. It's a long ass plane ride. And so I land there and I'm like, oh my God, what the hell? Where am I? Kind of thing. And I was with all these young white millennials. So that was weird for me. So I went through some ageism stuff going on that I put on myself because they were cool, right? And once I let that role go. So you have to understand this whole process is an unfolding process. So I had to like really, in order for me to really enjoy where I was in this present moment, I had to let go of some of who I thought I was. So it was all like,
And you were how old? So people
I was
can get it.
35 at this point.
Okay.
So I was around a bunch of 21-year-olds who, you know, parents bought them a ticket for a gap year situation, or people who were just like young kids just kind of wanted to do something new and different. So, or those who are like 25 trying to figure out their lives. I was the oldest person all the time. And so that felt weird for me. But then once I let go and relax a little bit, I had the best time. And some of them were my teachers or vice versa. I learned things from them as much as they learned from me. So I had to let go to enjoy the moment. And then there I lived in a couple of different places in Thailand and had some really wacky, crazy experiences and all that. But then my time came up, my contract was over. I spent some time traveling a little bit, and that travel led me to go to Bali to work with some shamans. I worked with, I believe, 5 shamans, 4
But that was
spiritual.
intentional, correct?
Yes,
Like
all
you-
intentional.
Okay.
I spent 3 weeks specifically because I had gone to Bali before, but it was a weekend thing. I stayed in the villa, you know, that kind of thing. I was having a good time. So the next time I went, I stayed in the homestay, and I just really I was on my eat, pray, love. I was like, I ain't leaving here till I found some more prayer and some more, all that other stuff. So I went through that, found some shamans, did a lot of deep research. And through that process, I remember I wrote an old article about it, but through that process, what was consistent from what they were saying is like, you really just have to trust yourself more. That's really the message I got from that. Trust yourself more.
Trust the
You
process.
trust the process.
Right.
And I think when you live in a society
Yeah.
like the States, where it's factory kind of style, you lose a sense of being able to trust yourself, right? Especially if you're working with somebody, for somebody in that corporate world or whatnot, which is nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, like, when you're working in like a, what's that saying, a cog in a wheelbarrow, you start just thinking like it and moving like it. So,
Well, they built the American dream to look a certain way,
Yeah.
right? You have to have a certain kind of car, or you have to have the car, the house, the
such
white
a
picket
linear way of
fence, the
living,
dog.
and that's not
It's
life.
a very linear way of looking at life. You know, you can't have the kid before the marriage. If you do so, you look at differently. You can't have, it has to be done in these steps and in this way in order for you got to work for 35, 40 years, 50 years before you can actually retire and get the money that your job, you know, put aside for you, or that you put aside for you. And then when you retire, then you have to retire. And it looks
Yeah.
like this. Like everything is planned out on
Like yeah,
what
my
Stepford
friend,
Wives type situation.
no. My friend had said one time, she was saying like relationships. She's talking about relationships, but you could look at this in life as well. But she said, I'm not into staircase relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning the first step, just
Yeah.
like not, so life can feel that way sometimes. And I don't know what I'm for. Oh yeah, about the shamans. Child, I went to see some shamans, but what I say this point to say that whatever thing that you're afraid to do, understand that you have been born with everything. It's just like society over time has reprogrammed us to think differently, and our job is to deprogram ourselves. So you have everything that you need to make those decisions, to take that risk and everything else. So trust yourself and just trust the process.
So let's jump into that really quickly, because as much as, you know, and I'm really laying all of the cards on the table here, as much as we say trust the process and, you know, do all these things, and we put ourselves in positions to do so, it doesn't just happen overnight for either one of us, right? What was your setbacks as well? You know, because I remember now everything that you discussed up to this point was before you and I met in Thailand, or before you and I reconnected in Thailand. So what I would say is, I know that when we connected in Thailand, your second time around after coming back from Japan, I remember saying to you one time, like, you left the States to come to Thailand to do the same thing? Because you were working full time, you were up early, in the house, and you was tired. And now here I am, jet setting around Thailand, like, hey, you want to go take a ride? You're like, well, I got to meet and I got to work, I got to do it. I'm just like, God dang, did you leave the States to come to Thailand to do the same thing? How did you feel about that? Like putting yourself back into kind of not a bubble, but back into the work 9 to 5 mode, and had to deal with kind of even things on the weekend that had to do with work, and then you ended up getting kind of more work because you started working for a university, and then you start, like, you really did,
you just kept piling it on, right?
You was piling it on, so everything that you were preaching, you were kind of setting yourself back. But can you talk about like why that happened, or what was going on in that time frame?
Well, what I always preach is like, do what feels most comfortable for you in that moment, and be okay with it once you make a decision. And so for me, I knew what these contracts, I knew what I was getting into, essentially. And I'm someone who, for better or for worse, if I commit to something or somebody's depending on something, my goal is just to just see it through. And then after it's done, make that, reevaluate and whatnot. So there are moments where I kept getting back into that, right? And a lot of that came back for fear, not trusting the process, or not trusting the process fully, and also focusing on like finance stuff, right? Because, I have a lot of student loan debt and I want to get rid of it and I want to be debt free. So there was a lot of things I was kind of hanging, kind of like in the middle of everything, right? Just kind of not knowing. And so I decided, you're right, I was doing the same things. And again, when I went back to the States, I worked for a language school a little bit here and there, but then I got a job, right? And I started, but I said to myself, if I'm going to do this, it has to be something that's within the realms of my interests. And it was different this time around. Back in the day when you would go for interviews, you kind of felt like you were dependent on this job, but I never felt that way coming in. And this is the most confident I ever felt in my life when it came to job interviews. And I was like, if this doesn't work out, it's totally fine. But I'm also I'm not going to seek a job that's totally out of alignment anymore. Or I'm not going to seek any other situations that's totally out of alignment anymore. And this position was completely in alignment. And it had the flexibility I wanted. And it had a very entrepreneurial spirit kind of thing. And so I was like, all right, let's do this. But then again, it was temporary. And I was like, I need to stop going back and forth with all this. When can I plant my feet to kind of like move forward? Mm-hmm. And that's when I opened the coaching business, started to step into myself. Now you see me a little bit more visible, speaking the truth of what I've been wanting to say when it comes to being a therapist, and reconnecting with that and redesigning how I wanted to see that look.
Yeah, I just really wanted to harp on that in that time, because what I want the listeners to understand is, yes, there's always a situation where we even, what I say, I don't want to call it backsliding, but don't listen to our own kind of advice, because we find ourselves doing the same thing that we're telling other people not to do. And I think it's important to just show the contrast that, like you said, a lot of it could have been fear-based. A lot of it was stemmed around, I need to be debt-free. I need to be debt-free. So I have to work. And that's the mindset that we're trying to say, don't be a part of. Mm-hmm. But then you found yourself a part of that mindset.
I'm not immune to that stuff. You know what I mean?
None of us are. That's what I mean.
Yeah. So it's like, give yourself grace, because the whole point of one of the elements of change is relapse. Understand that relapse may occur. Okay, but be prepared. Build a structure for when the relapse happens. What can I do in this process? Who can I talk to get a better perspective on things? Whatever the change is, put some supports in place for when those relapses happen. But what you're going to find over time is those relapses become less and less and less and less.
I love it. I love the fact that we're able to kind of like just break it down, right? Because when we really look at, our lives, it never was effortless.
No.
It happened, everything there was a lot of ebbs and flows, you know what I mean? And a lot of those ebbs and flows were not discussed publicly because they're our life, which, is our life, but now being public figures and really using our stories as a way to share and to inspire and empower others, I think it's so important that you guys know a little bit more, right, about kind of where we are and where we were in those times. All right, so we done went through a lot. Okay, so as we're getting up, as we're wrapping this up, let's talk about the move back to the States. So you were abroad, first starting off in Thailand, then you moved to Japan. Then you had went back to Thailand and spent the last year of your time abroad in Thailand. This was with me in Chiang Mai. This is when we really, we had a house. We were really kind of in the visible with Chronicles Abroad. You're building a lot more community. All these things are just happening. And then, bam, I'm going back to the States. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Truth be told, I wanted to continue to stay overseas, but I wanted to see my family too as well. And so I moved back, and I had this whole thing in my head of how things are supposed to be and how they're going to be. And you already know how that pans out, right? We have the universe would come in and say, "Ha, never mind." And that's exactly what happened to me. So I came back, forced all my ideals on my son. I got him up and running with some programs and stuff, and that was good for him. It worked out on that end. But his health really tried to take that over, and it just backfired on me. And so what I've learned over the months is just kind of let people be on their own journeys, and which is something I'm aware of. But even as a parent, we want to really want to hold on and grasp and do all these things. And I had to take a step back and say, this is not my life. Whatever happens will happen. And that's a tough pill to swallow, because we want to be able to fix things and take care of things.
Especially with the people we love.
Yeah, we don't want them to feel pain and hurt and all that stuff. But that's part of the growth, is the pain, the process.
And we want them to share in these beautiful experiences that we've been able to see and witness. And I get it. People always say, "Oh, do your kids come visit me?" No, they actually don't. And that's not my choice, that's theirs. And I used to feel really upset about it. Now I'm just it's their loss. I'm still living YOLO.
Yeah.
And having a good time doing it. It's nobody else's loss but the person who chooses not to be a part of it. It's not, I can't control those situations anymore.
Yeah. So living overseas, living overseas, I keep saying that because I'm just ready to go back. But so living in the States, it was tough. It was, I was at my cousin's house, I didn't have my own space. So I had to go back to that lifestyle. I've always had my own for a very long time. So being back there was different.
And what about the culture shock of
the reverse culture shock?
The reverse culture shock. Just the price alone, the cost of living alone.
Oh yeah, well, everything just run. Everything quadrupled. Going grocery shopping, spending $300-$400, for groceries, where I spent $30-$40 a month, barely. And that's when I'm splurging in groceries. So it was a drastic financial blow for me. And I think that's what led to getting something a little bit. I'm if I'm going to be here for a little while, I don't mind getting a job until I figure some stuff out and cement some things in the process. And so that worked out. And that helped also reaffirm that what I wanted to continue doing, which is being a therapist and coaching people through emotional blockages and all that stuff. So that reaffirmed that okay, Frances still got a little bit, I've been kind of a little rusty out the field. So that helped in that process, that reaffirmed that I needed to be reaffirmed.
What helped? Being grounded?
Going back to that position in a role. It was I became a middle school counselor. And so being back in that field, I needed to be back to see, number one, if this was something I still really wanted to do. Number two, how are those skills, do I still got it, kind of thing. And a lot of that was reaffirmed for me. And
so taking that job reignited what it was that you felt burnt out about 10 years prior, but now you're in a different place where you can handle, and you was able to manage and control it to where it suits you.
Exactly.
Because you no longer are a social worker for Department of, what is it?
That's okay.
Department of Family Services. Or
that was a long time ago. Yeah, I used to do child welfare. But yeah, so kind of like, it showed me an appreciation.
Want to be
right, exactly.
Okay.
It showed me an appreciation for it. And it also reminded me that, like, I don't have to, like, stick within these guidelines. I can literally serve people the way that I would love to serve people. I don't need to do it within an institution.
Yeah.
And so that led me to want to create something of my own, to create my own philosophy and serve people that way. Yeah. So, I mean, so being back in the States, I reconnected with my family. It was all positive. I definitely had moments where I was like, depressed for a few
Especially
moments.
When the winter hit, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Because you are back in Boston, of all things. Because you're actually approaching almost 2 years, right? A year and a half?
I'm at a year and a half, yeah. March is when I came back.
March is when you came back, but not March of last year, March of the year before that. So, full transparency, when you left, it was supposed to only be for a couple of months. A couple of months now ended up to a year and a half.
So, time moves. It moves.
Time moves.
It really does.
It moves very quickly.
And then the quarantine obviously slowed a lot of things down. But I was my plan was to leave around August. Or September, depending, getting my son settled, of
2020, sorry, 2020.
Well, because my son will be done with the program. He graduates in July. Once he get him settled in, but then COVID happened and kind of readjusted all that because of him moving, whatever. So overall, I needed that space back in the States because it also gave me time to kind of recenter myself, reconnect with family and all that stuff. So, but I knew it was time for me to go though. Like I kept feeling really antsy, which led me to go to Mexico, which is where I am now. And again, realizing like, yeah, this is the life that is for me. Realizing that I don't belong in the States. I just don't. Not the lifestyle, not any of it, not the energy that's there. And so it again re-solidifies that overseas is where I want to be permanently. Just not sure where,
Got it. Yeah. Well, you don't have any choices at this time, unfortunately.
Not a lot.
So, the choices are very, and it's sad, but it's the reality for a traveler such as myself, who is an avid, like full-time traveler. I've been in Mexico now for a little over a year. Do I love it? Not as much as I like it. I loved being in Asia. And just like you, Francis, having a thought process of how our time away from Thailand would look. I still have luggage in Thailand because I didn't expect to be gone over a year. I didn't expect to be gone more than 6 months. And here I am, a year and a half almost in Mexico. I took some time and went to Colombia first, but I want to get back to what I felt, where I felt good, where I felt my best, and I can't even get there. Mm-hmm. So that has been really challenging. However, it's been a blessing to have been in a place such as Mexico where I've been able to build community, find community, and bring community here. So that has always been a great point. But this goes with me going into the pivoting. Right. So during this year that you've been, pretty much back in the States, you've had to pivot. So for those that don't know, Francis has another podcast. And can you give them a little bit about your podcast that you have?
Yeah, it's called Tapped. Therapists Are People Too. And it's something I thought about when I was living in Thailand. And I decided to, basically, I got some of my therapist friends. I was like, yo, you want to do podcasts with me? And these are the most reserved folks, okay? This was a very big challenge for them. And so I appreciate them for saying yes. But I really wanted to give a different perspective and to normalize therapy, first of all. This podcast specifically is for therapists and healers and coaches and anyone who's doing this work, but also to have conversations that weren't happening that needed to happen. So it's a little unconventional, it's raw, it's transparent and authentic. And so we talk about some of the things that aren't really being talked about in the mental health field as therapists, healers, and coaches who are doing the work. And so it's a little radical. It's been fun. We're on season 2, just wraps up season 2. And we don't have a website. We keep it as basic, as simple, because everybody's so busy. So we're just keeping it really basic and simple, and don't know what we're doing with it yet. I don't know if it's going to be a forever thing. It might not. I don't know. It could be a seasonal thing.
Okay. So let's talk about also, you launched Defying Resistance. Can you give the audience, the listeners, a little bit of background of what Defying Resistance is?
Yeah, Defying Resistance. So on that blog, I provide ways in which that people can find ways to defy the resistance in their lives. So resistance to make a decision, whether it's procrastination, fear avoidance, like avoiding certain situations, all that stuff, anything that's kind of slowing you down, getting in the way. I provide you tips and resources how to kind of defy that resistance so that you can thrive, essentially. And that led to me creating my coaching practice, which is really helping women to remove emotional blockages so that they can thrive. Because I always find that people come back and say, I thought I learned that, but I didn't.
No, I love it, because the whole point of really just letting people know exactly where you are today, it shows from that spectrum from the beginning that we discussed all the way to now. Regardless of the choices or decisions that were made, you are where you needed to be at this moment.
Exactly.
And doing the things that you were called to do and living in your purpose. You might not had, you had 3 years of, kind of ebb and flowing and kind of moving your way through, but it led you to where you are today. So exactly. I want people to leave this podcast with that particular notion, is that we don't always have the blueprint in front of us. And even if we do have a plan laid out and we got it laid out,
no matter.
If the universe anticipates you to do something else, you go into ebb and flow. The life is about ebbs and flows, However, really understanding that your life and that you live in abundance and having that gratitude for the even smallest things around you will open you up for bigger and better opportunities. So it goes back to that whole mindset.
Yeah, and I just want to say, you are the creator of your life. And the minute that light bulb popped up for me, I was like, holy smokes, you can literally maneuver your life like a chess piece. And as long as you don't have, and as long as you're not committed to how it needs to look, the world is just going to open up for you.
Yeah, it's the letting go and trusting the process.
Yeah.
Literally, letting go and trusting the process. I think that's what we're going to call this one, letting go and trusting the process.
Trust the process.
All right, so we're going to end this podcast off today, this episode, with the fact that Frances right now is in Mexico. You are going back home shortly, but the goal at this point is to go back abroad, correct?
Yep. My target goal is October, early October. So, but we'll see where I land. Not sure. Not too many places, like you said. So.
You guys, I'm sure, will be kept up to date where Frances lands. But thank you. I wanted to say thank you for taking the time out and being fully transparent with our audience, Frances. I think people now are going to know so much more about you, even though you discussed little pieces in different parts of the podcast. I think this is the first time where we actually really talked about every little piece leading up
for all my business. Sorry.
All your business, because you know what? Our stories are what resonates with everybody, and our stories are what helps inspire and empower others. And that's the whole point of this podcast. So thank you for being open and being
thank you for being a good host. Hey.
Oh, thank you. See, my love language is words of affirmation, guys. So, hearing somebody say thank you makes my heart flutter and smile and shit. My face is all, all the smiling and stuff. So with that said, we're going to leave it on a good note before, Miss Ishtaker over here says something else that negates the compliment that she just gave. But overall, this was great. I look forward to
sky's the limit. Sky's the limit.
I'm so glad that we were able to put our differences aside and really work towards one common goal, which is to help inspire and empower others to live their lives with passion and purpose. So till next time.
Peace.